Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Introduction to Psychology. In this lecture, we're wrapping up the chapter on memory with some memory tips and tricks, which I think will be handy before your midterm exam, which is coming up on Friday. So, what can memory research tell us about how to study? Well, there's one important thing that I don't see on that list, and it's to sleep. Get a good night's sleep before your test so that your brain can consolidate your long-term memories in such a way that you can pull the information out efficiently later. One thing we know, a well-replicated effect, is that distributed study will be much more effective than mass study. So spreading out your readings, spreading out your review periods over time will result in much better retention than if you kind of leave things to the last minute and then try to cram it all before the test, which is totally what I did when I was an undergraduate. So I understand the temptations. There is a testing effect. What does that mean? Taking tests is a skill, okay? It's something that's above and beyond your knowledge of the material. You can know the material and be a bad test taker. So your score on a test reflects more than just your knowledge of the material. It also reflects your test taking skills. And you can practice your test taking skills by testing yourself on the material. If you can't come up with your own questions, which is a lot of work, I know that from making up test questions, there are often questions at the end of every chapter in a textbook, right? Like the little review questions, do those. Sometimes you can get an upgrade to a textbook, an ebook version that has some kind of adaptive learning software involved, or that gives you practice quizzes. When you want to learn something and retain it, one of the best strategies you can use is to try to connect the new knowledge to things that you already know. Okay, so that it creates a meaningful whole. Find a way to make it fit with what you already know. One way to do that is to make it personally relevant somehow. Think about how this information connects to a story about yourself that's in your episodic memory. That's one way to do it. The more deeply you process ideas, the better. Okay? If you're just copying down what somebody says word for word, that's a pretty superficial level of processing. Try to rephrase what you've learned. Put it in your own words. That'll help you process it more deeply. And today we'll go over some mnemonic devices, which are strategies for remembering things, particularly for remembering lists and ordered lists. But they use reminders and cues like rhymes or pegwords to help you remember the new material. Mnemonic devices include acronyms and acrostics. So an acronym, obviously you know what that is, but ADHD is an acronym for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And that acronym is a quick way to remember the larger term. In an acrostic, the acronym represents a sentence. So never let monkeys eat bananas is an acrostic to remember the ranking order of the differential count for white blood cells. There's mostly neutrophils, and there's a least amount of basophils. It is best if the acrostic or the acronym you come up with sounds meaningful. If it somehow connects to imagery, especially if that's emotionally arousing or shocking. And when I taught in pharmacy, I remember one moment of professional surprise for me when I was sitting in class with these very put together, very professional, very well-behaved pharmacy students who'd like dress up for tutorial. And I remember one of them, who was just very polished and put together, suddenly said something that, like, it stunned me. It was really dirty and had something to do with virgins. And I remember in the moment thinking, like, what just happened? And what should I say? Am I supposed to report this? But all the other students acted completely like it was normal. And then another one filled in what was basically an acrostic that was kind of a dirty phrase that helped the students remember something like the order of the nerves in the hand. So scared lovers try positions that they can't handle was the sort of safest one that I could find to put up on a lecture slide. Most of them are just, I couldn't put them on a slide, but that's a way to remember the carpal bones. Here's another memory strategy. It's called the method of loci. So we're going to connect what you're trying to learn to your memory for location. So think of a really familiar path, like maybe it's the path from your dorm room to the cafeteria. Okay. And what you're going to do when you have a list of things to remember is take each item in the list and somehow place it along the path. So I need a list of things to remember, but let's say you're trying to remember to get soap, lettuce, and honey. How are you going to remember soap? Well, what's the first place you're in on that route? The first place is in your dorm room. Okay, so maybe, do you have a sink there? Imagine a piece of soap next to the sink. Where do you store your stuff to go to the bathroom? Maybe there's a bar of soap there. Okay, and now to remember lettuce, well, what's the next step along your path to the cafeteria? It's as you open the door in the hallway. Well, now you're going to have to put some lettuce there. Okay, where could it be? Maybe there's a piece of lettuce on the floor. How did that get there? I don't know. That's going to help you remember. And then what's the next thing you see? Okay, maybe it's a stairwell that goes downstairs. Well, now there's going to be honey all over the stairs. How inconvenient. It's all dripping down and it's getting stuck in your shoes. So when you try to remember that list again, you picture the journey. And that helps you remember the items in the list. Rhymes function as cues. 30 days, half, September, April, June, and November. The rhyming words function as a cue for each other to help you remember them. Here is the pegword method that is for memorizing an ordered list, because these items all represent numbers. So 1 is a bun, 2 is a shoe, 3 is a tree, and so on. 10 is a hen, 11 is a lemon, 12 is shells. How are you going to use this? So let's say that you need to remember the words soap, honey, and lettuce. Well, you have to associate soap with a bun. Maybe you can think of like a cute artisanal soap that's bun-shaped. And now you're going to have to associate honey with a shoe. So maybe you've walked through a puddle of honey and now it's all over the bottom of your shoes. And you have to associate lettuce with a tree. You could imagine a tree with lettuce leaves for the leaves. So that's the pegword technique that's based on rhymes, because 1 rhymes with bun, 2 rhymes with shoe. There's another version of this, which is based on the shape of the number. Okay, so instead of using sound, this pegword system uses sound as a cue, as rhyme. 1 is a bun. This one is visual. So 1 is a candle, 2 is a swan, 3 is a butterfly. And to use this, we'd use the same technique. So have to associate a candle with soap. So maybe imagine a candle that is not burning properly because it's not made of wax. It's made out of soap. How are you going to associate a swan with honey? Honey poured all over a swan. And then you're going to have to associate a butterfly with lettuce. So maybe you have a butterfly landing on a lettuce patch in a garden. Get the idea. And see how this strategy is about hooking the new information onto things you already know. And linking, you associate concepts in a way that tells a story. So let's say you want to go to the grocery store and you've memorized a grocery list. People used to do this back in the day before you had cell phones. Okay, you're going to buy soap, honey, and lettuce. So maybe you imagine that as you are walking up to the grocery store, there's soap on the windows because somebody's been washing the windows. Now I need to link soap to the next thing on the list. Suddenly, you see a bee fly out of the soap bubbles. And now I have to connect the bee to the next thing on the list. And the bee lands on a display of lettuce. Get the idea. And so when you want to remember your grocery list, you remember the story that you came up with. Now I'm going to go over some general strategies for studying for tests. So effective strategies for reading, for taking notes, and for taking tests. You have a limited attention span. Does anyone know how long a normal human attention span is for an adult? To focus on doing one thing that's not tremendously difficult. Yeah, Chance got it. It's about 15 minutes. Yeah, 15, 20. Those are good ballpark estimates. And the studies that would determine that don't have people do really, really intense mental effort. For intense mental effort, it's going to be less than that. So I see a question from Owen, 15. A normal adult human attention span is something like 15 minutes, 20 minutes. But a lot of people believe that it should be like an all day long thing. That's not how it works. So you have an attention span and you also have a reading speed. You can figure out what your reading speed is. You can time how long it takes you to read a page of your textbook. And it takes me about like 2 or 3 minutes, and I think I'm a pretty fast reader. And I've been doing this for like 15 years. So it's probably, right, if you're in first year, going to take you longer to read a page. And you know, some people have more facility with this material, some people have less facility. So 5 minutes to read a page would be reasonable. And you can multiply the number of pages you have to get done with your reading span, with your reading speed, and figure out about how much you can get done in, say, a 20-minute block. And then you're going to need to take a break. Your mind will start wandering while you're reading, and then you pick your mind up and you put it back, right? You intentionally refocus. And it's normal for you to have to do that several times, fairly regularly while you're reading or while you're taking notes. Okay, you bring your attention back, but it's going to get harder and harder. And then there's going to be a point your brain is just like, no, and you'll be thinking about something else. Because remember, your mind wanders when it rests. And the more tired it gets, the more that it's going to do. And it'll come to a point where you're like, okay, this isn't worth it anymore. And that point will come after maybe 15 or 20 minutes, whatever your attention span is. And I see a question there in the chat. Is that attention span similar to performing tasks like working on something? So those estimates would have been devised from research in some psychology lab, and you want to know, well, what were they having the subjects do? Right? What were they having them read? And how cognitively complex was the task they were having. But what I'm trying to say is that you can't just sit down and read all day, because your mind's not going to let you do that. Okay, so that's why it's important to distribute your study sessions. If you try to read really fast, that will decrease your comprehension. So read for understanding, not speed. And one thing that will really help you remember is actively processing the material, okay? Rephrasing, pulling out the key points. And so when I read, I don't have my textbook with me right now, but I write all over that thing, okay? Like I scroll in the margins, underline, highlight, okay? I know some people like to resell their textbooks, but if you can afford to keep your textbooks, and they can be really good as a reference later, get in there with a pen and a highlighter and ink it up. I'll help you remember. Now, let's say you got to cram. Sometimes you do. Well, how do you do that? This has been researched. In World War II, people had to read manuals very quickly. And those manuals contained complex information, and it was a kind of a high-stakes life or death thing. And there was an educational psychologist named Francis Robinson, and he devised a reading comprehension method called the SQ3R method. And guess what? It helped win World War II, and it also works with college students. So how do you do that? It's like I unintentionally deleted that slide. But basically, the first thing you do with a chapter if you're using this method is not start reading at the first word. You read all the headings first. Okay? So flip through it, look at all the headings. Read the chapter summaries, right? There's like maybe there's a little introduction and a summary at the end, and then they have key points. Read those first. Why? Because that's creating the broader framework that you are then going to hook the information into when you read it. Okay? So you set up your framework with a survey, and the survey is based on the headings and the summaries. Then you come up with questions. You say, I wonder if this, I wonder if that, I wonder if they'll cover this kind of material. Okay, ask yourself a few questions. Now you're setting up some expectations. Then you go and read the material. And now that you're reading it, you have something to get into. based on your survey, based on your expectations. You might go, let's say you had a certain question, you'll find the answer and you'll say, I'll help you remember it. Or you'll think, oh, well, interesting how they didn't cover that. They actually went somewhere else. See how these are all helping you make relationships to what you're learning. And then after you've read it, you do a review your notes. So start with the chapter summaries, ask questions, then read it quickly. Okay. And they read fast, and then come back. Like if there was something that you missed, go back and read it more slowly in your review. If you have an ebook, there is a chances are that there will be an audio option where a robot voice will read the text to you. Okay. And you can modify the speed setting. Okay. So like you can make it slower or faster. Then play that while you're reading it. And look at, read at the same pace as the robot voice is reading. And that voice might help you keep your attention on the text. On to note-taking. First of all, I want to say that it is not possible to listen to what a lecturer is saying, read their PowerPoint slide, which is probably jam-packed, and take notes on it at the same time. You can't do that because your attention can focus on one thing at a time. If you are listening to me, you're listening to me. If you then start reading my slide, you've stopped listening to me. If you start writing down something, you're not listening to me or reading the slides anymore. So all you can really do is have your attention split between different things when you're multitasking, but you're not really doing three things at once. Okay. And that's why I like to give out my lecture notes. Okay. So that you don't have to, so that you have the least amount of note-taking to do. But here are some popular methods that folks use. In an outline form, you might take notes while you're listening to a lecture, or you might take notes while you're reading. In the outline form, you would make a heading that's like a main theme, and then have bullets under that with more specific points. I'm just looking at the chat now, and Chance says, when I speed up my Audible books, it makes me feel dizzy. I've tried that technique a couple of times while reading, and I think I got kind of annoyed and stopped doing it. But one thing I do like to do is listen to a book while doing some mundane task, like while washing the dishes or chopping vegetables or cleaning up, because, well, what else would I be doing with that time? Just letting my thoughts idle. So I find that listening to an audiobook in my downtime or time spent commuting or doing mundane things can make things more efficient. All right, back to note-taking. So this is the outline form. This is the Cornell method, and you take your sheet of paper and draw 2 lines to divide it up into 3 parts. And in the notes section, say during class, you would, take some notes using really concise sentence, shorthand if you know it, abbreviations. Okay. Remember, you can't, if you're writing in notes in full sentences, well, then you're not listening anymore, and you're probably missing more information than you're capturing. In the left-hand margin, you can write down cues, right? Draw diagrams, grab a main idea. And then on the bottom part, right, you would write a summary after class that reviews the material. Okay, look for the top level main ideas that give you a quick reference. I've never used the Cornell method. Have you used it? I think I took notes in university because I felt like I should. I don't know how useful they actually were to me. Okay, so Chance had to learn it in high school, but doesn't use it either. Does anyone find note-taking useful? What if you make mistakes?
I do.
Notes? Yeah? What do you do? So somebody
I just write down the slides.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I just write down like the slides and stuff.
Okay. And copying slides? This is concept mapping. It's a bit more informal. Basically, the idea is that you start with a higher level concept and then you break it down into other ideas that it links to. And you link those ideas to each other using diagrams. Now, this is my favorite method. This is the one that I recommend. If your instructor posts the PowerPoint slides, download those and print them. You can print to PDF or you can print to paper in this 3-note view. And that gives you the slide, and then it gives you some room. There's some lines for you to write down your own notes. And if there's something that you need to emphasize, then you can just scroll that down, and then you're not spending your time copying down the slide. I'm just going to read the comments in the chat now. There's one from Michaela saying, I use notes to study, and then if I need more information on something, I refer to the text. I recommend reading the textbook material before a lecture, actively processing it with highlighting and notes in the text. Then go to the lecture, take some notes based on that, and then as the last step, review your notes. And I also believe in the power of Control F. Okay, if you keep your notes in an electronic format, PowerPoint notes that instructors post already are in an electronic format. Okay, when you're on an open book test, Control F is your friend. And there's a comment from Sarah. I follow with the textbook and highlight the information being spoken to. Oh, interesting. Huh. I've never heard of anyone doing that, following a lecture with a textbook. Interesting. There is research showing that students are more likely to recall when they take notes by hand versus by computer. And that has something to do with the way your brain is engaged when you are tracing out a letter versus striking a key. I find myself wondering if there's any context effects here, though, like, because remember, we learned that you're more likely to remember something if it's tested in the same way that you encoded it. So, does this assume that it's a handwritten test? Well, in this class, it's an online test. So maybe if you're taking an online test, it's best to take your notes by computer. I speculate. When you're taking notes, don't really have the time to write out full sentences. So you're using keywords, okay? Short, abbreviated phrases that you can quickly scroll down, because while you're doing that, the lecturer is already on to the next thing. So your notes should be more than copying down what someone's saying, should be based on active listening or active reading, where you're rephrasing the content, summarizing it, doing something to process it. If you're taking notes by hand, a ring binder can be helpful because you can move the pages around and use dividers. You can take notes from like chapter summaries as well. Like often your chapters come with a little review section at the very end, which is basically like the chapter notes. Flashcards can be handy for learning definitions. It's very old school. Do you guys still use flashcards? You write the term on one side of an index card and the definition on the other, and you hold up the card with the definition and you look at the definition, you try to remember it, okay? Or sorry, you look at the word and try to remember the definition. It's a way of testing yourself. You might be able to remember it, and if you can't, then you turn over the card. And if you had to do that, then you put it maybe in a pile of cards that you still need to learn, put the ones that you've learned reliably aside, and keep going until you've learned all the key terms. I've had a number of questions from students asking me how to prepare for this midterm, and I think that learning key terms would be a good thing to do. There's quite a few questions that rely on your knowledge of key terms and definitions. Okay, so I'd do that. You can create a definitions page for key terms in your notes. In your textbook, the key terms will be bolded. Okay, know all of those. And I see a comment in the chat from Michaela saying that a lot of online texts have some kind of online flashcards, so you can build a flashcard deck as you read. That's cool. These online textbooks are newfangled. They didn't have them when I was in undergrad. So I'm glad you have all these extra services. If your instructor records lectures, you can go back and play over a part that you might have missed. Or you can play it while you do your laundry or tidy up or chop vegetables. Okay? Like maybe you listen to it a second or a third time over. See a comment from Calvin, who's not impressed with online textbooks, saying online textbook are a scam. And that interests me. As an instructor, I get a lot of approaches from publishers who want me to use their service so the students buy it. And there's a lot of pressure on like an upsell to these upgraded versions that have the bells and whistles. And I used to use them in my class and I cut them out. I know that some students really like them and benefit from them. However, it creates a financial barrier. Like some students like can't afford the textbook, and then it puts an extra, let's say $100 on the price of the course. And it also creates a considerable administrative burden for me in trying to say like integrate the Revel platform or the Launchpad platform with Brightspace or Moodle. And I'm not compensated for any of that. And I came to a point where I was like, I'm not doing it anymore. So now I don't use those ebooks, but I understand that some students do benefit from them. And I see Chance has a comment about the Forest app, which I've used before, and it sets timers. And while the timer is going, so let's say you're going to study for 15 or 20 minutes, a little virtual tree will grow, and it's gamified, so you can grow these little trees. I did use it myself, and I got bored of it pretty quickly. I've used something called the Pomodoro technique quite successfully to train myself to study periods. And what the Pomodoro technique is based on one of those little tomato timers. So let's say that you put it on 25 minutes, it would tick. So it'd be a ticking sound, tick, tick, tick. And you condition your working to the ticking sound. And then after 25 minutes, there's a ding and you get, say, a 5-minute break. So now there are apps that do the ticking and the dinging for you. So you don't actually have to have one of those little tomato timers. But I did use that to train myself to focus. And I used it for a while until I didn't need to use it anymore. And now I have the skills to just focus. But it did, using apps like that did help me develop my own study strategies. All right. So what should you be writing while you're reading a textbook? Well, look for key points, highlight, underline, rephrase them, write that in the margin. Okay. If you find an unfamiliar word, look up the definition and mark that thing up, right? Use arrows and diagrams and, visuals that will help you understand and recall what you're reading. Basically, you want to create as many pathways to the information as you can. So when you try to pull it out on the test, you use one of those pathways. And maybe it's the image that you drew. If you take notes while you're reading, you don't want to highlight everything because then the entire page would be yellow. You want to highlight about, 10% of the page and then mark up the side of the text. Your textbooks have really wide margins. They're like 2 or 3 inches wide, so you can write a lot in there. Okay. What I write in my margins is like headings or bullet points. And then when I am studying a chapter, I look at those notes to review. It is if you're taking lecture notes, it is a good practice to review them before you leave class. So I think what most students who take notes do is they take notes during the lecture and then the lecture's over and they fold up their notebook and go. You'll remember a lot more of it if you just take 1 minute at the end of your lecture to review them. Okay, because what the human brain likes to do is basically forget half of what you learned and very quickly, and then you remember the rest for a long time after that. Well, you can help yourself out, right? And by reviewing your notes after class, because then you won't have as steep a decline in what you remember. You'll catch some of it, make it gel, and then retain that. See a comment in the chat about something called bookshelf. And it looks like this is a way to get ebooks. I'm not very familiar with the whole ebook thing, but what I do is I'll usually find a physical copy of the text and put it on reserve in the library. So I hope that other instructors do that too, and then you can take the book out for, let's say, a 2 or 3 hour period, and that can help some students who can't afford to buy the text. So if you want to remember material for a test, as we said before, it's a good practice to distribute those study sessions, to use multiple encoding strategies. Create as many pathways to that material as you can. Because remember, according to the Atkinson-Schriffen memory model, there's no limit on your long-term memory. It's just a cluttered attic, right? You can stuff as much as you want up there. Your problem's pulling it out again. Well, create as many pathways to it as possible, okay? So when you're reading your textbook, One way to encode that information is by reading it with your eyes. Or you could also read it out loud to yourself so that you hear yourself. Okay? Or play the audio robot voice while you're reading. Okay? Now you have another way of encoding it, which is auditory. You can draw diagrams. If you see a diagram or a chart, engage your haptic memory. Trace it with your finger. Draw a picture yourself. Create as many pathways as you can. And then rehearse it. Okay? Repeat, summarize, associate ideas with other memories, personal ones, if you can. Okay? There is a phenomenon of overconfidence. We are often overconfident in what we know, right? You go into an exam thinking that you're really well prepared, and then you realize that actually you should have prepared a whole lot more. That's very common, that overconfidence. It's just one of the human biases. And so what do? How do you get around that? Overlearn. Okay, you think you've learned something after repeating it 10 times? Repeat it 30 times. Okay, because you probably haven't learned it as well as you think you did. And review. Ideally, do you review like within 24 hours of reading something, right? Review your notes right after lecture, right? Because the review is going to gel that information, but you want to do that while you still remember most of it, and you're going to forget a lot of it quite quickly. So do your review sooner rather than later. Okay, so on to tests. Test taking is a skill. No, it's really like a basket of skills. You have to read the question. You have to not have a panic attack. There's a whole bunch of things that you need to do in order to take a test. Okay, it's a skill that you learn with practice. Right now, you're in first year. You're getting used to university exams. By third or fourth year, you'll be an old hand at it. You can get more practice by finding opportunities to test yourself. Right? Try to answer those review questions that are at the end of the chapter. If there are any practice tests available to you, then use them. Pay attention to the question on the test. Sometimes students demonstrate their knowledge with a correct answer to the wrong question. Okay? So this table shows you the words that you often find on a written part of a test and what they mean. Okay, so define means provide the meaning. Analyze means examine and break this subject into component parts. Okay? Compare, contrast, critique, these all means different things. Discuss means explain, review, and consider. So understand what the question is before you answer it. So what should you do to prepare for a test? Go to class. A lot of students don't. Okay, there's 200 students in this course and 25% of you are here. I record these lectures and like maybe another 10 students will go and watch the recording. So my impression as an instructor, this is like the 6th course I've taught, is that most students don't go to lecture. At the beginning of a class, I'll see everyone like on the first day of class, and then it like drops off. And by this point in the year, maybe a quarter of the students are still coming. Okay. Go to class because, and try to listen because it's one more way to get the information in there. It's another practice session, right? Just do it. and try to actively process the information. Okay? You can engage and ask questions. In my experience as an instructor, most students don't. Like in a class of 100 students, usually there are 5 students or less who will, maybe about 5 who will engage with me by, putting questions into the chat, by raising their hand, or by coming to talk to me after class by saying, so I'll give you an example. Last class at SMU, I taught about pheromones, and then afterwards, a student came up to me and told me about how she went shopping with her friend for some perfumes, and she told me about how, they're selling these perfumes that are supposed to have pheromones in them. And we talked about it and figured that it was probably a scam because of the cost of the perfumes and the way they were advertised. But she was engaging and thinking about it and doing it. And I wouldn't be half surprised if, she got the pheromones question on the test. Yeah, and there's a comment in the chat that some people may have more difficulty with online learning and with engaging in online classes. And yeah, I agree. There's kind of a bit of a weirder feeling to it. Like sometimes students will talk to me before or after class in person, but not so much online. Do your readings. Many of my students just don't read the text. Okay, that's like a normal thing. Not reading the textbook and just relying on the lecture notes. If you do that, you will definitely miss something. And even if everything was in the textbook, if everything that the lecturer said was in the textbook, reading the textbook is still another opportunity to process the material. If you have friends in the class, have a study group. In some of my courses, the extroverted students, like the ones that are typing in the chat right now, would kind of start talking to each other and maybe develop friendships, start a study group in the library. One year, one of them invited me to go study with them in the library, and I said yes. They all ended up with A's. Okay, you could ask me questions while I was there. Use your resources. And if you need accommodations, get them. I went through my entire student career without accommodations until my last class because I was scared to use them. Like it felt intimidating, honestly. And I always thought, well, what if the instructor actually doesn't implement them and then I'm in trouble? I was quite scared to use them. But when I did, I was like, wow, this is so much better. The extra time and writing in the accessibility center. Yeah, I should have done that so much sooner. If you must cram, try the 3 SQR technique, okay? Focus on the high-level summaries, the class notes, the outlines, the headings, key terms. Studying key terms is your friend, okay? And maybe prepare like a 1-page summary sheet with the harder to remember information. If you cannot bring your notes into a test, a good strategy is to quickly jot down anything you've been trying to remember when you get the test, right? Turn it over and then quickly write down those things that you're trying to remember. If you're in an open book test, then you should be going into the test with notes that are already prepared, okay? So when you're coming into the open book midterm, you should have your notes organized, reviewed, open, ideally in computer form so you can control F them. You should have your textbook open or your ebook open, okay, in another tab. So you can control F that. When you get your test, the first thing you always want to do is go through the entire test without answering any questions, okay? So you see that first matching question, look at that drop-down list. And keep going. Look at every item. Look at all 50 without answering any of them, okay? And the reason for that is because you actually have an unconscious mind. And now when you go back to the beginning of the test to start answering questions, it can work on the questions that you've already seen. And you might have an aha moment. Okay? Use the powers of your conscious and your unconscious mind. Next, right? When you're answering the questions, answer the questions you know first. Get all of those, because you don't want to run out of time and not have answered a question that you knew the answer to. Then, now we're on the third pass. On the third pass, you can answer the questions that you're not so sure about. And you narrow it down to the 1 or 2 options that you think might be right. And then go with your gut. There's research on this. And when students go back and change when they weren't sure and they selected something and then they thought about it and changed it, usually they were right the first time. Okay? So trust your gut when you're not sure. Then there's some questions that you absolutely do not know. Guess. Never leave a multiple choice item blank, because if you just randomly selected something, assuming there's 4 options, a 25% chance that you got the right answer. Okay. A lot of students who I see failing are students that run out of time and leave things blank. You're better off guessing. And then if you finish early, use that time to review your answers. It's 10:20, and I'm on slide 72, 78. I'm going to keep going because I'm recording. Okay. And when you review, right, check for obvious mistakes. It's an opportunity to proofread or to add any additional information, right, if you weren't sure before. But don't change your answers without a good reason. Once you get your test back, you want to take a look at it, right? There are often mistakes in the grading key. I got a bunch of exam questions from another instructor. I was really stressed out and I didn't have enough time to come up with test questions, and he helped me out by giving me his intro psych test bank, and I went to use them. And as I was putting them in as I was inputting them, I was like, oh, that's not right. Like, what he told me was the right answer. I'd be like, no, like both A and B could be right. And it was about 20% of the questions that I had to throw out. So imagine if you went into his exam prepared, and, well, you're going to get at best maybe an 80 or an 85 just because of, like, so let's say you knew everything. You knew 100%. You're not going to get 100% because there's errors in the grading key. And so go over your wrong answers. And sometimes you'll see the instructor be like, oh, oops, okay. And they'll give you the point back. And sometimes you actually will have made a mistake, and you learn from feedback, right? You will learn a lot from looking at that and seeing where you went wrong. Okay. So I do recommend that you request to view your exams. Then there might be things that you need to do differently. Like maybe you know that your study habits can improve, and there are resources to help you with that. Like there's resources for student success at Mount A. There's people who can help you with procrastination and with study skills. If you need accommodations, get them. Sometimes the medical route isn't the best way or the appropriate way, and you just ask the instructor, make your pitch. And some of them will say no, but some of them will say yes. So it's always worth asking. And sometimes, you can ask the instructor to do something differently. And sometimes they'll say no, but hopefully more often they'll say yes. Test anxiety is an issue for many students. If you panic before your test, well, how can you manage that? Prepare. You'll be more anxious if you don't prepare. Eat and sleep well. Breathe through a straw if you're panicking. Some people hyperventilate when they panic. One thing you can do is just take the first minute of the test to allow yourself to panic. Be like, okay, I'm panicking now. Write down your stream of panicky thoughts. Get them out of your head. Okay, and then put that piece of paper aside and go write your test. There There are also counselors can help with test anxiety, and put it in perspective. If you fail a test or you fail a course, it's a hassle. It's not the end of the world. So midterm 2 is on Friday. It's the same format as midterm 1. You have 10 matching questions and then 40 multiple choice questions. It's open book, but prepare as if it were closed book, because you can't leave looking up the information to the test, really. And have your notes organized, ready, your text open. Use Control F when you need to. I've had a number of students ask me what they should do to prepare. And so I went through the exam and I thought, what would I want to know if I were a student and I were taking this exam? And I think the best advice I can give you is to learn key terms. The matching question is worth 10 points. And there are about like 15 definitions, and some of them are the answer to the question, and some of them are distractors. And in order for you to filter through those, to cut out the ones that are relevant and to accurately match the other ones, you need to know the definitions. So like depolarization, what's that? Dopamine, what does that do? Serotonin, like you need to know these things, kind of have that information at the tips of your fingers. So I'd say key terms studying key terms is a good idea. And then there's a few questions, or at least a couple of questions that have diagrams on them. Remember that some of the questions are randomly pulled from a larger test bank, so not everyone has the same test. But that said, there are some questions that will show a diagram of the brain and then point to something. Okay, so let's say, it's that. What lobe of the brain is that pointing to? Okay, that's the frontal lobe. I also recommend reviewing how the neuron fires, right? Like what are the steps? And here's a question for you. If one neuron was going to inhibit another neuron that it's communicating with, what would it do to that neuron, the postsynaptic neuron, electrically? How does it achieve that? All right. Sorry I went over time. Thank you for your patience. Are there any questions from any of the remaining students? Check the chat too.